Welcome, everybody. John Arvosis here with my friend and colleague, Thomas Zimmer. Thomas is a professor at Georgetown. I'm going to introduce him in a second. I'm going to see if I can actually go live. Here we go. I want to go live so I can watch this on TikTok as well, myself as a guest. So Thomas is with us today to talk about extremism in America, historical context in the world. Let's wait about a minute, Thomas, because usually it takes a little bit of time for people to filter in. So I want to give them a chance, whether it's on YouTube or TikTok or wherever. It takes a little bit. It doesn't take too long, but it takes like a good minute maybe. So I just sort of keep reminding folks, we're going to be talking about extremism in a moment with Thomas. We're going to sort of go through some of the topics first. Then we will do a Q&A that I will handle. TikTok numbers are still getting there. Then I'll sort of try to handle the Q&A, and then we'll go from there. I'm trying to think what else I was going to tell you. Oh, yeah. I mean, for the TikTok folks, actually for the mods on TikTok, to let people know, I do have the gifts on this time, but be aware that any of the gifts that are goggles or head, anything that goes on the head will not work on TikTok when I'm doing streaming with a guest like this. So that's why the thing at the bottom says, no hats or glasses gifts, please. So all the other gifts are very well loved, but not the hats and glasses. And for the folks on YouTube, as always, I will sort of queue up what questions I can for Thomas. If you do a super chat question, I guarantee those will come first, and we will try to get through everything as much as possible. On TikTok, submit your questions via the Q&A in my profile, okay? All right, I'm going to start right now, guys, just introducing Thomas, and then we'll just get right in because we've got a lot to talk about today. Thomas Zimmer teaches 20th century U.S. and international history at Georgetown, Georgetown's BMW Center. I love how Georgetown does that. We had our, Georgetown gets a lot of, I went to Georgetown. We get a lot of money from a lot of people, and we get to name things after them. So BMW Center for German and American and European Studies, with a focus on the transatlantic history of democracy and its discontents. I have titled the session, The Coming Civil War. The idea behind it really is to discuss, I think really the launching point for me was thinking of Joe Biden's speech the other night about semi-fascism, going after the MAGA crowd. And Thomas, I mean, I've talked about it a lot on my show myself, but because Thomas is an expert in extremism and has a really interesting perspective on the historical antecedents. In other words, looking back at our culture, looking back at the history of the world. And I think, if I'm not putting too much in your mouth, Thomas, a lot of sort of what he sees today, his observation as a historian, is rooted in, but you've got to understand it didn't just happen now.
But first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited. I don't think I've ever been on a TikTok or Twitch.
Exactly. There you go. See? The mighty Twitters, you're his first.
It feels like that should make me a little extra nervous, I guess.
Yeah, maybe.
But I'm excited to talk democracy, although I don't know. It's I think a lot of this is not going to be super pleasant because
I mean, look at the topic, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think it is certainly true that if you look at the current situation in America, the current state of democracy, there's a big debate around how much of this is in continuity with sort of long-standing trends in American history, how much of this is more an aberration from sort of long-standing trends in American history, how much of this is really just Trump, how much of this is caused by Trump, or is Trump not the cause and rather the symptom of sort of long-standing ongoing stuff. And yeah, I think it's probably true that as a historian, I'm kind of professionally sort of obliged to maybe tend towards the sort of the continuity perspective. But I think that is, I think in this case, it is really important to think this through, right? How did we get to this point where American democracy is on the brink? When did it start? How do we get from this country supposedly being this sort of, stable liberal democracy to wherever we are now? And I think that is.
Okay, can I ask you real quick? Is it correct to say that knowing history, is it correct to say that America's democracy is on the brink?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's bad.
Look, I think the best I can answer this. Maybe I'll say this: amongst democracy scholars, people who observe American democracy from all sorts of disciplines and backgrounds, and not just in America, but also internationally, I can tell you that every serious democracy scholar is basically like no one doesn't think that American democracy is in severe danger, and that there's an acute imminent threat to American democracy. I've not seen any person that I think is worth taking seriously that would have given you any other answer there. No, I think it's bad. It really is.
And Thomas says this as a German.
Yeah, I mean, I say it as a German, although I'm not super clear about how I am German. So yeah, that is.
I'm saying that half as a joke because honestly, you know more about American history than I do.
Well, look, I'm an Americanist, right? So my work, my research is focused on the long struggle over American democracy, the history of democracy and its discontents, basically, and specifically on sort of anti-democratic tendencies and impulses amongst conservatives on the American right since the 1950s. So that is what my research is focusing on, right? But I am German, in case anyone was wondering why I talk a little funny. So, and I get the question a lot, like how does your being German and being a German historian, obviously being aware of sort of Germany's history in the first half of the 20th century, how does that affect my perspective, shape my perspective on these issues, on extremism, on right-wing extremism, on sort of far-right assaults on democracy? Right. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure what the answer is. I believe that my perspective is more shaped by me studying the history of American democracy rather than coming from a sort of German perspective, right. Because I find myself very much in tune with, or very much in line with what historians of American democracy are saying, right. More so than with sort of German observers who are maybe coming from very different backgrounds. Right. So yeah, I'm not sure what to what extent of my German background is shaping my perspective, but I can definitely tell you there are some very concerning echoes to sort of the demise of democracy in sort of the interwar period in Europe in like the late 1920s, early 1930s, when democracy basically almost vanished from the European continent within a few years, and was basically replaced by sort of authoritarian, mostly right-wing authoritarian regimes almost everywhere on the continent. And there are some very concerning echoes to that. There's no question about it. Yeah.
Right. Now, okay, I mean, let's just jump right in. I mean, I think two different things. Where do you want to start with this? One thing before the show, Thomas had mentioned to me that even the aspect of talking about a civil war is a interesting phraseology, civil war, and whether that's a good or bad thing. Why don't you start with that? And then let's jump right in with Biden's speech, because I know you said you had sort of a mixed review of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this, the civil war, the coming civil war. Is there a civil war coming? Does this all end in civil war? Whenever I say something publicly about, the state of American democracy, whatever is going on the American right, I get this reaction a lot from people who basically say, look, there's no other way. This has to end in like the new civil war, like the next civil war. And I'm kind of like, I have to say I'm not a big fan of this, of using this analogy, right? Because, well, first of all, there's a lot of people on the right who are talking about the coming civil war, on the far right specifically. Right. And they do not mean this as a warning. They mean it as they are rejoicing at the prospect of a civil war coming, right? They're itching to get it started, right? These people want a new civil war because they believe they will win it, and then they can finally sort of wipe away all this sort of secularism and liberalism, which they believe these are sort of these fundamentally, quote unquote, un-American forces that are destroying real America. So they want to get rid of all of this, and they think a civil war would be just what they need, right? So that's how people on the right talk about it. People on the left, by the way, when I'm using this term, the left, I really just mean everyone in this sort of pro-democracy camp.
Right, because you've got conservative, Liz Cheney would be on the left in this case.
Well,
I know we got into this. Actually, that's an interesting discussion. I'm going to write that down for later because
yes,
you got an interesting back and forth with David Frum about Liz Cheney, as I
recall.
And I was a little more on David's side, who will be a future guest here. But go on. I don't want to get you off track, though. Yeah,
I just want to make sure that when I'm saying the left here, it's or sort of the small d democratic side. I'm not talking about class leftism, Marxism, whatever. I'm broadly speaking, the people who prefer for this country to be a democracy, right? And I think those people, so this camp is also talking about the coming civil war, but obviously not rejoicing, but more as a sort of worst case scenario of where this could go. Now, where I'm kind of like want to push back a little bit from a kind of historical perspective, maybe, is that I think some people imagine this to be just a repeat of what happened in the 19th century, and that's just not going to happen, right? So the idea of, we'll have another civil war with like two mass armies, one dressed in dark blue and one dressed in gray, and they're going to be shooting at each other on the battlefield. That's just not happening, right? History does not repeat itself, never, right? History is not repetitive. History is accumulative. That's not going to happen. It's also, there's not going to be a North versus South kind of conflict, right? I think the people who are kind of expecting just the next edition of the Civil War, they're not, I think they're underestimating how specific that situation was in the mid-19th century. The political geography today is so different. The conflict is not between states in the North and states in the South.
Urban and rural, right? Or what would you say?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's basically, that's one of the main dividing line in American politics in terms of its political geography is urban versus rural. That's one thing. But also, like, there's not one single block of sort of quote unquote red states and one single block of blue states. Like there's Wyoming and North Dakota and whatever, and they're not like simply geographically, right? There's not one block with like Florida and whatever. So it's not going to work like that. There's not going to be just a repetition of what we went through in the 19th century. Now, I will say though, sometimes people push back against this notion of a coming civil war, basically to say, oh, this is so alarmist, like all these crazy leftist alarmists, like now they're talking about a civil war, how dare they? Basically to say, let's calm down, everyone, it's not that bad. That's not what I'm saying. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. And I think in this respect, this analogy is helpful because it does tell people, it transports the fact that we are looking at a situation in which there will be a lot more political violence coming over the next however many years, however many decades in this country. So again, when I push back a little against this notion, I'm not saying it's not that bad. I'm just saying it's going to be bad, but in a different way. But to the extent that this term, coming civil war, is meant to kind of raise awareness for the fact that we will be looking at a situation with violence.
I want you to look at the comment I just put up there. Can you see it?
Let me see.
I've heard it described as something like the Irish Troubles, but dumber.
Well, I don't know about dumber, but yeah, I mean, look, it would be interesting to think through like what are the sort of historical analogies that we think might fit here. But again, I think it is absolutely fair to expect it's going to be a very, very unpleasant ride over the next however many years in this country. There's no question about it. And I'm afraid we're already seeing a remarkable, and I mean remarkable in a bad way, remarkable level of political violence. And that's not going to get better. I don't see any way that's going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And so I think in a way, there might be something like a civil war type political.
Did you see what Steve Bannon said today?
No.
So Bannon, and just to sort of tell folks, in case folks were, so Steve Bannon was Trump's, at one point, campaign manager, went to the White House for 6 months, didn't really last, but certainly sort of Svengali, behind Trump, doing Rasputin, doing a lot of the really bad MAGA stuff and ongoing. So Bannon got pardoned for a scheme that they were raising money for the border wall. They raised, I don't even know, 10 million, 20 million, something like that. He allegedly took $1 million for himself and his co-conspirators, and they had said that no money, they had said 100% of your donation will go to the wall. In fact, some of it went to them. So they got sued, or not sued, but indicted, federal law. Trump pardons them. Now New York State is going after them. And Bannon is going to have to turn himself in tomorrow to be whatever one does, processed through the system. And his statement today was crazy, of course, but he concluded by saying, you're gonna have to kill me before you get me on this.
Well, I mean, there is a certain, again, I said people on the far right, to which Bannon certainly belongs.
Yeah, 25 million. Okay. Yep.
They are sort of itching for this kind of violence, right? And they're also itching for, there's a certain glorification.
Calling for the violence. I mean, when I hear those comments, there's a lot of nuance going on with that comment. It's not just, I'll die before. It literally is saying, you're going to have to kill me because why? You'll be taking up arms? I mean, there is an implicitness to this of they'll have to kill us all before they take us down. To me, that means we're rising up arms.
I mean,
but
there's also a lot of explicit stuff about this coming from, and not just the far right fringes, but it's been very much sort of mainstreamed within the Republican Party. You see this in all these when they do these there's sort of election kind of little videos they put out, like candidates all over, like Republican people sort of Republican nominees for all sorts of, like, for Congress or whatever, all over the country. They're putting out these videos, and they always have guns now, right?
Oh, yeah, they shoot stuff, and
And it goes so far, like sometimes it literally, like, this guy Eric, what was his name, Greichins, I forget what his name was, who basically said, like, I'm not using this for hunting, I'm using this to kill people, right? And like there's always this, again, it's very explicit.
They're blowing up liberal. Actually, a lot of the Republican campaign ads, they're shooting cars that represent liberals. I mean, and
that was Marjorie Taylor Greene, like famously or infamously doing that, right? I think it was about a year ago. I think it was last summer when she kind of, like, used like a sniper rifle, I think, to blow up some. It was what was it? It was some kind of hybrid car.
I don't remember. Okay, yeah, vaguely. Yeah.
It's like a token of like crazy lefty liberalism. They all drive these hybrid cars, whatever. Anyway, and that was about a year ago, and now it's become, like, you see they're putting out these photos where it's these Republicans with their families, and everyone has a gun, like little kids.
Oh, the Christmas cards they keep
the Christmas cards, exactly. Yeah. And it's always, of course, it's ridiculous on some level, and you want to laugh at it. And, like, look at these, like, crazy people, like they're celebrating, like, Jesus Christ, but also they're celebrating Jesus Christ by celebrating gun culture, whatever,
with a gun. Yeah,
entirely bizarre, right? But it's not funny because this is one of the two major parties that is gleefully sort of tearing down this, what should be a red line in a democracy, meaning political violence is off limits, right? And they're tearing down that line. They're crossing over gleefully, right? And they're legitimizing and justifying that, again, by the insinuation always is these liberals, these leftists, they're coming for us, but we're ready. We got these guns, and we're going to use them, right? We're going to use them, and that's again, that's why I'm saying it's not. Is that still implicit, or is it already explicit, right? Yeah. And that's everywhere on the right, and of course, yes, it is. That's sort of always been there on the sort of the far right, neo-Nazi far right scene, whatever, white power scene, but it's now being mainstreamed, and it's become sort of mainstream Republican, the way Republicans present themselves. Their promise basically is, we're going to use those guns, right, to defend quote unquote real America. And that is, I mean, you cannot overemphasize how dangerous that is, right? When you're at that point where one of the two major parties is explicitly legitimizing political violence that way. And
now, historically, I mean, tell me historically about that in terms of legitimizing political violence, imagery, culture. Is that like a leitmotif, so to speak, that we've seen elsewhere?
I mean, look, my somewhat sort of flip answer to that is wherever you look, whenever you look for like historical analogies for this, it never ends well, right? There's like no easy way back from this once you made it that far. Look, there's always, every society always harbors these sort of far-right extremists who revel in the idea of using political violence against the enemy, like the enemy within, right? That's every society has those people. What distinguishes the current situation in America is that one of the two major parties is elevating these people to positions of political power and is mainstreaming these ideas and legitimizing these ideas. And that is, again, that is the line. It's not the fact that there are people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's the problem is that she's being elevated, and
she's being elevated by their president, or by their leader, I should say, by our president, by their leader. Because I often will tell Republicans, MAGA Republicans at least, who get defensive on this topic, they'll bring up Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or something, and I mean, it's not even worth getting into the substance, because even on the substance, there's no comparison with what AOC says and what Donald Trump says. But what I always bring up to them is AOC isn't president. If anything, she's still considered a fringe of the Democratic Party. Now, fringe in part just because she is the left of the left, even though she has a strong fan base. But amongst the Democratic establishment, she is not the mainstream, and she ain't the head of our party. But on the Republican side, you've literally got the head of your party that is adopting these things and pushing these things. And that itself is a big difference. Even if she were like Trump, and she's not even anything like Trump in any way, shape, or form.
I think it's always useful to kind of bring in maybe sort of an internationally comparative perspective at this point, right? When people claim that, oh yeah, like whatever is happening on the right is bad, but also on the left also so bad, right? And look, two things about
because she wants healthcare for everybody and climate change addressed.
I mean, look, the first thing to say about this is the argument is not that there aren't crazy left-wing extremists somewhere in America. It's a big country. It's like 330 or even more million people. Like, it's got everything. Of course, these people exist, but no important voice within the Democratic Party is elevating this or is legitimizing any of this. It's like, look, if you're being annoyed because someone said something crazy on Twitter, fine, that's fine. Be annoyed, but that's not the same as these people being elevated to positions of political power and again, this sort of political extremism becoming the mainstream position of one of the two major parties. That's one thing. The other thing is, look, there's so much research on where the two parties stand and where sort of the center of either party is, like the center of gravity, right? Meaning sort of where is the mainstream in either party ideologically, politically, in terms of policy positions. And look, every single piece of research on the two major American parties will tell you that the Democratic Party is just by international standards, it's just a very standard sort of center-left party. Nothing crazy about it. A fairly big tent. It ranges from Joe Manchin all the way to AOC, right? That's a fairly big range. But the center of gravity is very sort of standard center-left. All right, it's not in any way different from what you look at with the Social Democrats and the Green Party in Germany, which is like standard center-left stuff. Okay, fine.
Yep.
The Republican Party, on the other hand, the center of gravity in the Republican Party is not where every other major conservative party in the quote-unquote Western world or in the industrialized world is. No, it is where far-right parties are, right? So by international standards, it's very clear that the center of gravity, the Republican Party, makes the Republican Party a far-right party, right? A party that is dominated by an authoritarian, rapidly radicalizing movement, and that's something very, very different. So again, whenever someone brings this up, but the left and the right, no, sorry, like, just empirically speaking, like, that's just not what we're looking at.
You know what's funny is only a few years ago, Europeans would always tell us, oh, you think you have left and right parties. The Democrats in Europe, the Democrats and Republicans would be the same party. Or practically the same party. And that has it's interesting in such a short. You're making me think of what you said about the 1930s in Europe. Not maybe it wasn't just the 1930s, but how over such a short period of time you had countries go from democracy to not democracy. I don't know, was it 1930s or was it early 1900s? You were saying
no, 1930s. Yes, 1930s.
That quickly of a change, and all of a sudden now you're talking about one of our political parties being far right when once upon a time Europeans didn't even think there was a difference between the two.
I mean, it's not it's not that long ago that in the 1950s, there was no, in the 1950s, there was a Republican Party and a Democratic Party, but there was no Conservative Party or Liberal Party. These parties were, ideologically speaking, both of them were very centrist. And there was basically no, with the exception of the Democratic Party was in and of itself, a weird coalition between like more sort of liberal-ish leaning Democrats and the Southern Democrats, the so-called Dixiecrats, which was basically just a sort of white supremacist party in the South, right? So there was, for historical reasons, there was a weird coalition going on there. But that, if you leave them out for a minute, the two big parties were so similar that amongst political scientists in the 1950s, there was this big push that said, "Oh, we need polarization. We need party polarization because a democracy needs
conflict or what?
It needs two parties that are distinguishable. Like for the voters, like voters need a real choice when they go to vote, right? They need a real choice between two different parties. And so there was this big push coming from political scientists who were worried that American democracy was in danger because there was not enough polarization, right? Oops. And so, look, it was shortly thereafter in the 1960s, as a reaction to the civil rights legislation, the Civil Rights Act, the establishment of the Civil Rights Order, that one party basically decided, look, the Democratic Party, we're going to be, although somewhat reluctantly at first, we're going to be on board with this idea of turning America into a proper sort of multiracial democracy. And everyone who was not on board with that vision, it took several decades for that to happen, but over time, right, everyone who was not on board with America becoming, again, a multiracial, pluralistic democracy, kind of united within the Republican Party. So you get over time, right, we call this process, we call it partisan sorting or party realignment, right? And so over time, you get to the point where we are now, where, I mean, you have two very clearly sorted parties, and they have mostly sorted around the issue of what kind of country should this be? Should it remain a country where a certain group of people, white conservative Christians, right, should be at the top and should get to say and should get to define what does and does not count as real America? Or should the country become what it has often claimed to be but has never really been, which is a truly sort of egalitarian, multiracial, pluralistic democracy? And the parties are clearly polarized around this.
I mean, let me ask you about that then. I mean, and again, we'll talk, and of course, we're totally not doing our outline. I put above, but that's okay because this is interesting. Historically, sure, race, I would say up until Donald Trump, race played a key role, not exclusively, but let me counter argue this a little bit, especially a lot of the reading I've been doing lately about how Donald Trump is about grievance. He's about revenge. He's about convincing you who to hate. It's not ideology. It's not politics. It's not policy, what they're organized around. They're organized around grievance. Now, you could argue, and I suspect you will, that grievance is race, or race is a key element, but is it possible that Trump is a continuation of the Republican Party going in that direction, but at the same time, isn't Trump probably grabbing a lot of weird Democrats and everybody else too? I almost wonder whether Trump goes away and we could fix this, because it's not a normal alignment of left versus right. It's this weird alignment of aggrieved versus people with a bunch of policy positions, which is Democrats.
but the question is, what are they aggrieved about? What is the grievance, right?
That's what I figured you'd say.
Yeah,
Go on. Yeah.
No, exactly. And you said he's grabbing a bunch of Democrats. The question is, which Democrats is he grabbing, right? And I think
grabbing the new Southern Democrats, so to speak.
Well, he's grabbing, and look, this is really both the Obama and Biden, both the Obama and Trump presidencies. The political scientist Michael Tesla used this term. I think it's very useful. They clarified the politics of race in America. What I think people need to understand, shortly before the Obama presidency, so we're talking 2006, 2007,
right,
the majority of non-college educated white people in America, I'll say this again because it's so important. The majority of non-college educated white people in America was not able to tell the difference between the two parties in terms of where they stood on race, racism, and a question of multiracial democracy. So when they were asked which of the two major parties is doing more or less about, I don't know, racism, race, whatever, the answers were all over the place. This changes the moment Barack Obama becomes the presidential nominee for the Democrats and becomes president. At that point, it's obviously very clear, so to speak. That's why Michael Tesla says it clarifies the politics of race. It becomes very clear, like Obama is the symbol signaling to everyone, oh, that's what the Democrats stand for, right? The Democrats stand for an America that is not dominated by white conservative Christians, a multiracial, pluralistic America, right? And the Republicans are on our side to that. And at that point, what you see is that basically there's a large group of mostly non-college educated white people going from the Democratic side to the Republican side. And when you look specifically amongst non-college educated white people, who are the ones changing party allegiance, basically? It's entirely the ones who are holding sort of racial grievance, white grievance, racial resentment, right? So basically, it's I think the distinction that you made there's policy issues over here, and then there's the grievance over here. I wouldn't do that. I think that is, it's not one of the big problems that we have in this country. One thing that consistently sort of distorts our discussions about where American politics is, that we are pretending to be having a policy discussion when actually what we're having is a discussion about national identity, racial cultural identity, racial cultural grievance, and that informs the policy position. So basically, you cannot isolate policy positions and policy discussion and basically pretend they're happening in a vacuum.
Devil's advocate, put COVID into that framework. How do you explain what happened with COVID and how the Republicans weaponized it? That wasn't racial, or was it?
Well, look, I think it wasn't. What happened there? Okay, so many things happened there, right? In very simple terms, what happened there is that people take their cues from political leaderships and political elites, right? And so it was entirely feasible at the beginning of the pandemic. I think there was a sort of a world potentially in which Donald Trump could have claimed, like, this is a threat to national security and we're going to take it super seriously and whatever. By the way, other conservative parties in some other industrialized countries did exactly that. They framed it as a national sort of emergency and whatever. And we are the patriots who are defending the nation from these kinds of threats. And so this is how we're going to react. But, Donald Trump opted for something entirely different. And I think there's many reasons for this. So it's never as simple as, it's racism made the Republicans not wear masks. That's not how it works. But a certain attitude towards the state, towards state regulations, towards the federal government, that certainly informs this. There's also, of course, the fact that there is just a very strong sort of quote unquote market libertarian force kind of shaping the Republican Party. The answer to COVID had a lot to do with the fact that the people who are funding the Republican Party didn't want any restrictions. They didn't want the economy to shut down. So, what are you going to do? But I think what I'm saying is, here's what I'm saying. No serious person is saying the answer to everything is you say race and the discussion is over.
Right.
What I'm saying, and what many people are saying, is that the big divide in American politics, and look, if you want to go that far, this goes back right to the beginning, right? We're talking late 18th century, but really, like, specifically since the 1960s, last third of the 20th century or so, there's just two competing visions of what this country should be. And there is this one vision that says, well, we should try to finally realize the promise that was basically put out there in basically the Declaration of Independence, when it said, well, all people are created equal, right? And what is America? America is defined by this idea that you can come here, and if you adhere to this idea, to these egalitarian ideas of everyone is created equal, then you can be an American, right? That's one vision. But there's always been a large contingent of people that were just not on board with that vision, that have never envisioned America to be defined by this idea, but to be defined as a place where a certain group of people is at the top, where a certain group of people gets to be at the top, where sort of a land, first and foremost, of and for white Christian conservatives, right? And so this is sort of the big struggle here that is going on, and this struggle informs all policy positions, right? So just to be very, very concrete, like, sometimes I get questions like, how do you explain that, let's say, I don't know, people in Kentucky vote for politicians who will not give them better healthcare, even though they really need better healthcare. Right. So why do conservative people in Kentucky, why do they vote, quote unquote, against their interest? And people who say that, they define interest very narrowly in terms of like economics, financially, like what you got, how much money you got in your wallet, what kind of, and you look at them and you would say, oh, shouldn't they be voting for the party that wants to extend Medicare, right? Or that wants to give them better healthcare, whatever. And then some people say, oh, they don't do that because they're being seduced or they're being lied to and whatever. They're just following the Pied Piper. There is some truth to that, but I think the better way to look at this is that these people simply define their interests in a different way. Right. They understand that voting for Democrats would give them better healthcare. They're not dumb. They're not uninformed, right? We should take them seriously. We should take their political choices seriously. They are smart enough to understand that Democrats would probably give them better healthcare, but they're saying, look, my overriding interest is something else. I want this country to remain a place where people who look like me, right? And I mean, in this case, I mean literally like me, being like a white boy, right? People who look like me get to be at the top and get to say what is and is not America, and get to sort of define what America should be, right? And they believe that they have a right, that they are entitled to have their own image reflected back at them. Right.
There's also a major religious component, I would argue, as well. So that things like abortion may not have a racial tinge to it, but it clearly has a religious tinge. Morality, the dissolution of the country, out of wedlock births, divorce rate. I mean, they, again, though, there's a tinge of race because they're talking about going back to the way it was.
No, but here's the thing. That's why I'm saying. That's why I'm always, the vision is one of white Christian patriarchal dominance. And all these elements matter. The white matters, the Christian matters, the patriarchal matters, right? It's all these elements, right? And that is why the vision, the animating vision, is to take this country back to, well, it's not the real 1950s, it was kind of the idealized 1950s, sort of pre-civil rights regime, basically. Pre-civil rights legislation, where you have a country, again, of a situation of white Christian patriarchal dominance. And by the way, this is not a vision that is just about political institutions. It's not just about who's in charge in Congress. It's about who's in charge in the family, who's in charge at the workplace, who's in charge in the public square, right? It's an all-encompassing vision of, again, who gets to be in charge. Now, I'm not saying, right, like sometimes I get people say, oh, this kid is claiming that, like he's always talking about who gets to be at the top, and he's pretending that all white people are rich and powerful. No, that's not what I'm saying. Clearly, not all people, just because they're white and they're conservative and they're Christians, are like powerful and rich. That's not what I'm saying. But in America, there's always been a certain status advantage that has come with being white Christian conservative, right? And that is what these people are acutely aware of and what they want to preserve. It's a specific form of traditional hierarchy, right? That's what it is. It's conservatism basically is a project of maintaining traditional hierarchies, right? And again, maintaining traditional hierarchies along several different dimensions. White Christian patriarchal. So there's the race, there's the sort of the gender, and there's the religious issues. All of those matter, right? And that is the vision, right? That is sort of animating. And then if that is how these people define their political interests, all of a sudden you don't have to grasp for like, oh, they're being seduced and they're being lied to and they don't understand that they're going against their interest and all this sort of false consciousness nonsense, right? That's not what this is, right?
So are they more complicit?
Oh yeah, clearly. I mean, they're not.
Okay.
Here's the thing. That just comes with taking these people's political choices seriously.
Right.
You can even
actually, let me read. It's funny. I had one quote I'd pulled aside from Mary Trump, and I think my guess is she's kind of talking about Republicans in Congress, but the quote applies more broadly. Mary was saying, I hear people say that Republicans are afraid of Donald Trump. Again, this would be Republican leaders. No, they're not. They are him. They are sticking with the guy who gives them permission to be their worst selves.
I think it's so important to push back against this cowardice narrative that's out there, and like,
or they're being duped. That's funny. It's because I mean, sometimes I do think they're being duped. They are being lied to. But that's an interesting concept, which is, oh, they know they're being lied to. They're complicit.
So a few things about this. So one thing is there are limits. Look.
Let me say one thing too. Answer this. Let's talk a little bit of Biden's speech, and then let's open it up to questions, because I'd like to maybe have half the time be questions if we can.
Totally, yeah.
So finish this comment. Let's do a little bit of your thoughts on Biden's speech, and then open it up.
So I just want to say that there is this narrative that Republicans are just afraid of Trump, and that's why they're not standing up to him. And you have people like Adam Kinzinger will constantly say this, right? When will my Republican colleagues finally like have the courage to stand up to Trump? It's not about courage. It's not about a lack of courage. It's about there was a reason why they united behind Trump. They got exactly what they wanted, right? The promise of Trump was a white grievance politics, a sort of pushback against finally someone to stem the liberal tide, right? And to get someone who was not going to be constrained about norms and rules and whatever, who was going to push back hard, right? And Trump has never broken that promise. He has given them exactly what they wanted. And it's not, again, I'm not saying in individual cases, clearly the level of violence and violent threat that is coming from the MAGA world. I'm not saying that's not intimidating. So we're not in individual cases. Clearly, that's a factor. Right. But overall, right? Let's not like give Republicans this sort of easy out apologist tale of, oh, we're just afraid. Really all super on board with democracy. We're just all so afraid. No, that's just not what's happening here. Right. But anyway, the president gave a really important speech.
Yeah, talk about Biden's anti-fascism speech, and then we'll do Q&A, because then we'll get into more there anyway. But what?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know we have been there have been about 17 of Trump-sparked news cycles since it happened, because it was about a week ago, and apparently in the way American politics goes, this is like
he's back.
Jesus, but look, the U.S. president raising the alarm about an immediate threat to American democracy, that's a really big deal. And it's really worth kind of trying to unpack a little bit what he actually said there. Side note, absolutely remarkable that the major networks didn't broadcast the speech live because it was quote unquote going to be too political. After broadcasting every single Trump rally, because, well, he's the president, we got to broadcast this. Absolutely remarkable. Again, remarkable in the worst possible way. Also remarkable the kind of freak out that we got from, sort of broadly speaking, the centrist world, right? About optics and whether or not the speech was too political and too partisan. All of this was just a deliberate attempt to ignore and distract from the actual substance of what the president said, because what he actually said was absolutely crucial.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
He said, look, American democracy is in acute danger. It is under assault from a rapidly radicalizing group, which Biden calls the MAGA Republicans, in which he very clearly distinguishes from what he calls mainstream Republicans. And he was very clear that...
Wait, can I stop right there? Can I stop you right there? I kind of had your feeling, and I get the reason to distinguish the two, but I keep sitting there and going, okay, so you're not a racist, fascist, insurrectionist. You're just willing to vote for one.
Yeah, no, clearly. I mean,
does that really make you innocent?
No. There's no innocence.
It reminds me of what I hear Biden make that distinction. Well, I'm not talking about regular Republicans. What? The only people Biden isn't talking about is David Frum, Rick Wilson, Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, and a couple others I can't remember. That's the only people he's not talking about.
I mean, look, to his credit, Biden was very clear that these MAGA Republicans are not just a fringe phenomenon in the Republican Party, that they are actually dominating the party. So he said that very clearly. But you're absolutely right. There is no plausible deniability for anyone who's on board with putting Donald Trump back into the White House, right?
But politically, he has to say that, and I get that.
Of course, right? But again, like the diagnosis was far clearer and far more direct than anything we've ever gotten from anyone in the Democratic establishment, really. And I think he was very clear about the fact that the MAGA world, Donald Trump, and again, all of the Republican Party being complicit in this, is hell-bent on preventing this country from ever becoming a sort of multiracial pluralistic democracy and trying to abolish constitutional government and replace it with authoritarian minority rule. He was very clear and very specific about this. That was the diagnosis. And again, I think I said this in the beginning, that is a diagnosis that is shared by every serious democracy scholar in the US, in the world, and every person in America who prefers to live in a democratic system needs to understand this and needs to grapple with this. Now, let me tell you just briefly where I had a problem with the speech, right? Because while he was giving such a clear diagnosis, I think, again, he was spot on about this part of the speech. There was also a striking tension between this diagnosis and certain myths about America's supposedly exceptional character that he seemed unable or unwilling to shake. Right off the bat, he was like, oh, the US is the greatest nation on earth. It's a beacon to the world. And what made the country great in this view that he presented there is this idea that supposedly, defines America, that he said, that beats in all our hearts, right, and unites all Americans. He called it the soul of the nation. Right. This belief, again, I'm paraphrasing Joe Biden, not my view. This belief in equality and democracy, the notion that all people are created equal, right? And he also said that, in this nation, this America, again, this is a direct quote, no matter how long the road, progress does come. Now, look, this is just a myth. This is just a sort of...
You got to fight like hell for progress or it don't come.
I mean, again, here's the thing, right? There's just never been a consensus that America is defined by this egalitarian idea that all people are created equal. That's the whole problem, right? If this story that Joe Biden, towards the end of his speech, was kind of pushing about, this is the soul of our nation, we all agree that all people are created equal. If that was the case, then we wouldn't be in this situation, right? Then he wouldn't have he wouldn't have had to give this speech in the first place, right? That's sort of the whole thing, right?
Okay, that's a fair point. Yeah. Okay.
The whole thing is that at its heart, the country has always been divided between those who envision America as a beacon of democratic equality and those who see it as a land of...
You're reminding them of something that they clearly don't believe in. So how does it benefit to remind them? You're right, because you're literally trying to remind them and say, come on, guys, we're all about, not if you're embracing a fascist movement, you're not all about democracy. So saying it doesn't really win you any points with them.
I get the sort of political aspect to this. I also get that you want to kind of you want to balance the gloomy diagnosis, right?
Well, you know what? I'm sorry, but you know what, too, Thomas? Politically, that speech had two purposes. Democrats like to say it wasn't political. Bullshit. I mean, this speech was about the November elections. I said this to you guys on my lives here. I said 50% of that speech was about the November elections. 100% of that speech was about saving our democracy. You know what I mean? So the entire speech was about saving our democracy, but 50% of it was motivated by winning the next election. So
I get that.
But my point though is that mentioning the things of what we all agree on, he's really saying all the sane people in America who was the coalition that voted against Donald Trump last time, we all agree on this, and I'm reminding you. The problem is, look, I get all this. The problem is, though, this sort of exceptionalist tale of America is defined by this great idea, and over the long run we'll have progress. It's the whole Obama like to say, like, the moral arc of the universe. He did again. He and Michelle kind of did it again today. I could just see. I was watching, thinking of you. Like Thomas is going, no,
it's not good, because look, the problem is, right. I know some people will say, well, this is an aspirational message and we need that. Fine, but the problem is that. This exceptionalist of progress gospel, right? It has often stifled any attempt at sort of seriously grappling with America's past and present. It is threatening to undermine the kind of robust, urgent response that the president is calling for. In the end, right? I think his last sentence was like, he said, I'm going to quote it. I have it. I've written it down.
Yeah, that's good.
He said, I have no doubt, none, that this is who we will be, and that we'll come together as a nation that will secure our democracy. Okay, man, that's fine. But look, if you have the whole thing is American democracy is in doubt. You can't say the American democracy is on the brink and then also say, hey, I have no doubt that things are going to be fine. That's the whole thing. The whole thing is we need everyone to understand that it is in doubt. There is no reason for there's absolutely no reason for these kinds of reassurances and sort of these fake certainties about American progress and whatever.
Well, it almost makes it sound like we don't have anything to worry about, so why get involved?
Forget all about this. You have to forget all of this stuff, right? It absolutely can happen here. It is happening here, right? Even in the land of the free, it is absolutely happening here. That's what people need to understand. And that's why I am a little skeptical about this whole, again, progress and we all believe in democracy thing.
I'll make a quick point and then we'll go to the questions. You made me think France. I've lived in France a lot and been there a lot. I do not claim to know France like the French do. Eric, who is here with us in the comments, is a Parisian. Or I shouldn't say Parisian. He lives in Paris. I don't mean to slur you, Eric, if you don't like Parisians. I like Parisians. But the French, I've heard many a tale of the French when issues of discrimination come up. They talk about how there is no discrimination in France. It's guaranteed. I don't know if it's the Constitution or what it is, but the égalité, fraternité, liberté, or whatever it is, or liberté, égalité, fraternité. And they're like, no, it's guaranteed. There is no, so we don't need laws to protect it because it's guaranteed. And it makes me think a little bit of the concept of if you keep reassuring people that this is who we are as a country and don't worry, it'll end okay, they kind of think, well, we don't need to do anything because Biden said it's really bad, but it'll be okay.
We need people to be alarmed and not be reassured that everything's going to be fine.
Eric is international. Eric says he's international.
Oh, good. Look, this whole this is not who we are. I get the impetus to say this,
right?
But we need a realization that No, actually, that's exactly who we've been as a country.
Yeah.
And we want to do better and overcome this, then we need to grapple with this. Honestly,
we're gonna have to fight like now. What he really meant what he meant was, if we fight like hell, we can win this, because you don't want people to get so dispirited they don't fight. But you've got to. This is actually this is a typical political activist thing, which is you've got to convince people something is horrific and we're all going to die. But we can stop ourselves from dying. You know what I mean? You literally have to get people to the brink and then lighten them up by going, but we can change this. But you've also got to convince them we're fucked.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, look, I get the political messaging part of it. I just hope, really hope, that underneath it is an honest understanding that this is just messaging.
Yeah.
And there is no guarantee of progress and overcoming this and whatever. And that's where I often sort of find myself when I listen to sort of the Democratic establishment describing the situation. I'm like, I really hope them just saying this because they think it's good politics and not because this is actually their diagnosis. Because if it's actually their diagnosis, then we have a problem, right?
Right. Now, let me I'll bring up a couple little things. Daniel Legacy. Everybody should read Richard Rorty's warning in Achieving Our Country. You're saying the same thing. Are you familiar with that or no?
I'm familiar with Richard Rorty. I'm not super familiar with this. I haven't read it, so but I'm
just curious.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Was just curious. Let me pull up a couple different. We always get like the super chat questions first, since people pay for them, and it's also a way of helping me out. I'd be interested to know from the professor what he was taught about the Third Reich and its causes in grade school, high school in Germany.
So that is a very interesting question. I think so there's two things. On the one hand, National Socialism, the Third Reich, Hitler is very present in sort of the German school curriculum, right? So it's starting in. Well, keep in mind, I'm about to turn 40, so it's been a minute, okay? So I'm not entirely sure I can't, and my kids are too young, so I can't, also I live in America, so what do I know? But look, when I was in school, and of course I taught at a German university until 2 years ago, so I get these kids coming from high school to me. So on the one hand, it's very present, and it's talked about and not just in history, by the way, and it doesn't even start in history. It's talked about in sort of when they read literature, they're reading novels from the time or about the time. It's talked about in sort of religious education or whatever, in all sorts of contexts. It's talked about, and then also in history, it's talked about. So on the one hand, it's very present. On the other hand, it's very abstract. It's very sort of like, remember the Nazis were really bad. And then when they came to me as sort of undergrads at university, and I would sort of quiz them a little bit about, hey, what is it you actually know?
Right.
So one thing I would ask them is, hey, can anyone name any other extermination camp other than Auschwitz?
Oh,
there were several.
They don't know any of them. Yeah.
No one ever can, and no one can even like. And I tell them, can you tell me, like, of the 6 million Jews roughly that were killed in the Holocaust, how many of them were actually killed in an extermination camp, and what happened to the others? No one can tell you, like, this stuff. So it's very, in a way, I'm not super happy about sort of the Germans. The way the German school tackles this, because it is what you get with these students often is they have a sense of being of getting like, why do we have to talk about this again? We've talked about it so many times, but since it was so abstract and they're not actually being taught,
and it was a long time. Well, the thing is, I find, and I think younger people per se are farther away from the history than we are, because whatever the historic moment is, I was born in the 1960s. So, you know what I mean? So the Soviet Union's real for me. It's not real for you. Actually, DDR?
For me, Kind
right?
of.
I mean,
Look, I'm a historian. I'm reading.
okay, fair enough. But you were 10 when Germany was reunited, though, right? I mean, ish.
Not even. I mean, not
Okay,
even,
yeah.
I was born in '82, so yeah.
No, but my point is, in that sense, as newer generations come, history is no longer my grandfather, my mother, or me.
Yeah, no, of course.
It's me looking at the Civil War, and I'm like, I don't even freaking care about the Civil War. I mean, Southerners and their fixation on the Civil War. I'm like, I'm not the North. I'm from Illinois.
We should. You
no,
really should.
You know, listen to the historian, but my point is,
yeah, I get your point.
That kind of historical abstraction where I'm like, my family came in the 1930s. I don't freaking care what you're pissed off about 1860. There's a so that it's, I can imagine for Germans as well, there becomes an element of it's ancient history at some point.
And there is, of course, I mean, there's
right?
both. There is a big debate around this. How do you teach it? How you talk about it now that it sort of fades away from living memory, right? And of course, there have always been political forces that wanted to fade into the background, right? That wanted to go away, and they want to stop talking about the National Socialist past. They want to claim, oh, it's been so long, we're now a normal country. Like this whole normal country thing is big in Germany, and it has been since the 90s. So there's always that. But it's an ongoing discussion. How do you teach people who, like, again, for me, it was still my grandparents, right? So I remember growing up, there were people. I mean, it was surrounded by, in the village, a little tiny village that I grew up in. I was surrounded by people who fought in the war, who were Nazis or voted for the Nazi Party, whatever. So it was still, I still had a direct connection. Yeah. And that is obviously gone. Yeah.
So Harvey Kittle, I will read this just in case we have people on who do not have, who cannot read or not see. I mean, would you say Trump has redefined shameless hypocrisy and made it allowed in politics? And if so, how far would you say it goes with Trump supporters? Are they aware of it? Do they care?
So I think, once again, in this respect, as in so many others, Trump has maybe radicalized something, or he has sort of exacerbated something, but all of these tendencies were there well before Trump. I mean, Mitch McConnell is the embodiment of shameless hypocrisy. You will not find a politician in American history that is more shamelessly hypocritical than Mitch McConnell. It is his one superpower, and it tells you a lot about, and nothing good about, America's political culture, that not only does he get away with it, but he actually succeeds with it. What I will say about the hypocrisy term is, a lot of what is criticized as hypocrisy on the Republican side is not really hypocrisy, but something actually worse, something far more dangerous. So, for instance, right, when they talk about, voter fraud, and we need to no vote by mail, no absentee voting, that's just voter fraud. And then you have the same people voting by mail, and you say, it's hypocrisy. And of course it is, but it's also something else, because the notion of hypocrisy assumes that they start from a position of everyone is sort of an equal participant in the democratic process, but they don't, right? It's not hypocritical if you start from the assumption that we are the good ones because we represent real America. We're not a threat to this country. So for us, it's totally fair to vote by mail. But these people, right, these liberals, these Democrats, and then all these of course minority groups that tend to vote Democratic, they are a threat to real America.
You're not supposed to vote if you're Democratic. Your vote is illegitimate.
Well, your vote is not supposed to count equally, right? So it's only hypocritical if you start from the assumption that everyone is equal before the law, but conservatives don't. They do not start from that assumption. So I think, again, it is hypocritically right, but underneath it, there's something else that is far more problematic.
Let me pull up Elise's. How important is it for a society to have a truth and reconciliation process to address atrocities? Is it necessary? Thinking, of course, of Germany, also South Africa, and more recently, Canadian residential schools. Now, I I would say ignore the word atrocities, but the question is the Trump era, the MAGA movement, how far down the rabbit hole we're going in terms of extremism and fascism. Do a lot of people need to, first of all, I don't even know what it is, the truth and reconciliation. Do a lot of people need to go to jail? Will that only make it worse?
But that's the thing. So that's the thing. Truth and reconciliation does not mean accountability. And what we need is accountabiliability, right?
Okay, then define the first and the second.
The truth and reconciliation commissions, that they're often a phenomenon of sort of post-authoritarian societies, like in Spain, for instance, after when the Franco era ended and Spain became democratic, and then they set up this process of truth and reconciliation,
with like documenting all the crimes and things.
Yeah,
but exactly. I know Canada, a lot of it's been going on with the Indigenous Native Canadians. They call them First Peoples, I believe, is the phrase they use, but meaning the Aborigine. I think they even say Aboriginals or Aborigine, which I was like, Aborigine. Like, it was a funny word they used that I went in America, we wouldn't use that word, but the native communities there, and detailing the slights and abuses and making them public with an imprimatur of the state saying this did happen.
And then that is supposed to lead to the second part, which is reconciliation, right? But look, before all that, that's all well and fair. Before all that, we need accountability, right? What happened? So let's be specific and talk about January 6th, right? The people responsible for that, and that starts with the man chiefly responsible for this attempt to nullify the result of a democratic election and to stage a coup and end constitutional government in America, because that's what it was, is Donald Trump, and he needs to be held accountable. The truth and reconciliation part is not going to do anything if we're not holding these people accountable, right?
Okay. Does it solve anything, or does going after Trump simply enrage because it gives them exactly what they want? Devil's advocate.
It gives who what they want?
It enrages Trump's base, makes him a bigger Are we making Trump a martyr? Are we causing even more violence, like Lindsey Graham threatened?
Look,
going after Trump.
Here's what I will say about this.
Obviously, I think Trump should be locked up for the rest of his life.
I know it's not you saying that.
But
look, here's the thing. Everyone who says, let's not, it's going to lead to so many problems and to violence and conflict and whatever. Look, Pandora's box has already been opened, right? Okay. Attacking and contesting the election in this way, putting political pressure on all those involved in elections, and if all that fails, different forms of pressure, including violence, right? And I was using euphemisms there by saying putting political pressure on people. The danger is maybe not that someone will repeat the Trump coup attempt in the exact same way, but more generally and more fundamentally the danger is if Trump and his enablers get away with this without real accountability, then it is established in American politics that you can do this and nothing much will happen to you.
It becomes part of the political culture.
And look, we have all these norms and rules and agreements around accepting the results of democratic elections. If those are no longer in place, and if violating all those rules and norms and agreement doesn't lead to any kind of bad consequence for you, that is a problem. A democracy that cannot enforce those norms and rules and agreements in any way will not remain a democracy for long. It's out there now. It's now inevitably and irrevocably part of the political scene, of the political imagination, of the political repertoire in this country that you can do this. The question now becomes, what are the consequences for this? And if there are no consequences, then it becomes a blueprint for future democratic elections. And look, again, it would not holding Trump accountable would prove that there is nothing a sitting president could do that would get them in trouble. Look, whatever you want to call that, it's just the end of constitutional government, and it's just not good.
Couple questions in a row on this. I'll just read all three. Do you feel we are headed in the right direction to have accountability? If not, why? If Trump goes to jail, what do you think the MAGA Republicans will do? And do you think Trump should be in jail?
The last one is easy. The answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
Again, what I just said, I think we need real account. Like, again, a democracy that cannot defend itself,
Right.
like if the institutions tasked with upholding the democratic system and constitutional government cannot or will not bring themselves to hold those accountable who staged a direct assault on constitutional government.
Okay.
Again, all I can tell you is it will not remain a democracy for much longer.
But how do we do this when we are not in a situation where we have won a war? This is not Germany.
Yeah.
You are not stuck in those seats in Nuremberg and we're in charge, right? We were running Germany. We were running Japan, the country. That's not what's going on here. These guys are still one vote away from being in power. And if Donald Trump, I'm devil's advocate here, but if Donald Trump is prosecuted, every Republican is going to defend him and they're going to declare war, and it's going to foment even more violence. So how do you have accountability in a way that buttresses democracy and doesn't actually fan the flames of fascism and incivility or whatever?
It's a super hard question, and there are no easy, like, I think this is absolutely crucial. Where now the choices that are left on the table are between bad and worse.
Yeah.
Those are the choices left on the table. No one is saying there's like an easy answer here, put them in jail and everything's going to be fine.
Right.
They're just, the Republicans are going to wake up from their like slumber and just see the light or whatever. That's not happening. No one is saying that. Like no serious person is saying that.
Right.
The choices are between really bad. Look, it's not a small thing to indict and hopefully put it.
Let me stop you. I'm sorry, only because also because Thomas only has another 20 minutes before his children have to be put to bed. But that's not really my question. My question is, in addition to holding Trump accountable, indicting him, putting him in jail, what else has to happen so that it doesn't simply create a martyr who makes the situation worse? What else has to happen to solidify our democracy when you've got another political party that's going to scream bloody murder because he's in jail?
Well, they're going to do that anyway, right? So you have to just accept that that's what you're going to get.
Okay, but is there something else we need to do besides throw him in jail? Because that's not going to be enough.
We need to vote them out. I mean, clearly. I mean, look.
I kind of feel like they have to hit rock. What worries me is, and actually somebody else raised this question. Hold on, I'll bring up the question because it was, okay, Rob. Rob was asking, is there any way to walk back the current situation if January 6th wasn't enough?
No.
That's what worries me. Is January 6th, that they tried to violently overthrow the government, and even that wasn't enough to make MAGA fall apart and the country rise up against them.
I mean, here's the thing. The assumption or the hope or the belief, whatever you want to call it, that there is a line that they're not willing to cross. I'm talking about the people and the forces who are in charge in the Republican Party, the American right more broadly, that there is something that is too extreme, that they're not going to go that far, right? Just throw that out the window. That's gone. That's out. Again, the reason why that doesn't work is you have to look at how are they giving themselves permission to embrace all these extremist measures and all these extremist people like the Marjorie Taylor Greens and of course Donald Trumps and whatever, right? Like how's that happening? How are they justifying that for themselves and sort of in front of the world? And the permission structure that they have set up, it always goes like this. The permission structure is, look, whatever we're doing, the other side is worse. The other side is already doing it, right? That's why they are playing up this idea of a radical, totalitarian leftist threat that so the quote unquote the left that is supposedly pursuing this fundamentally un-American project of turning this country into something it must never become, right? Of destroying real America, and using violence and whatever to achieve those goals. So in the imagination of MAGA world, and not just MAGA world, but the American right more broadly, they're not the aggressors. They're never the aggressors. They are the ones playing defense. We're only defending ourselves here, right? Because the other side is always worse. Whenever I say something publicly about how dangerous it is that the Republican Party is now mainstream Republican Party is now justifying and legitimizing the use of political violence.
Right.
I'm getting an avalanche of like, oh, but where were you in the summer of 2020 when they completely destroyed Portland?
Yeah.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so, as bizarre and kind of funny as that is, because I can assure you Portland has not been destroyed.
It wasn't great. Actually, I will say this, devil's advocate, but a very good friend of mine was living in Seattle. The horror stories he's got about that little People's Republic they created, and this guy is not a Republican. Horrific what they created there. The violence and everything. These guys were afraid to leave their houses. Some really bad shit went down. But again, this was not something that was the president of the United States doing.
Or anyone in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I'll call them lunatics. There were some fringe lunatics in Portland and Seattle.
Well, I'll say that once again.
But I never called them that.
I'll say this again. It's a big country, right? 330 whatever million people. Big country. Lots of Nazi.
And they're not at the pinnacle of power, A. No. And B, we don't embrace them.
No, exactly.
So them bad.
Right. So, but what I'm saying is, in the reason why people on the right bring this up all the time, and again play this up as look what the left is already doing, is it gives them permission to, embrace whatever they think is necessary to defeat the supposedly totalitarian left, right? And that is what's happening. And once that permission structure is in place, there is no line that you're not giving yourself permission to cross. Look, if that's why, like all the stuff where they're playing up this idea that, oh, the Democratic Party is full of like pedophiles and groomers and whatever, right? Like, look, if you either convinced yourself or you're convincing your followers that you're fighting not just a political opponent, but a fundamentally un-American force that is like abusing children and pedophiles, then what is there? What measure is not justified in the fight against such evil? Right? Nothing. This
is a point I always brought up during the LGBT right back then. We'd say gay rights battles, and I would go on TV and argue with these people who would accuse us all of being pedophiles. And I kept bringing up that very point of you are using the language of violence. I actually said on one of the TV shows, I said, I've got 2 nephews. If some pedophile went after them, I'd kill him. I said, I'd probably be in jail because I'd kill him. And I said, that's the language you are using for gay people, language that will get people killed simply because you've branded them. Again, it's the language of violence, blah, blah, blah.
But it's part of this. Again, it's part of this permission structure, right? That they have established. Like, we're not the aggressors. We're only defending real America. And like, in the defense, like they are, I think this is really important. Most of these people truly believe that they're fighting a noble war to defense of their version of real America, right? And I think, sorry,
my dog was trapped in the room.
Okay. And I think that is, again, once you understand and once you start, again, reading what's happening on the right and some of these right-wing intellectuals and how they are justifying uniting behind Trump and whatever, it's the same thing over and over again. And that I think that that will cure you very quickly from this notion that there is a line that there will not cross. No, they absolutely will.
Check out Thomas's question. I got a few more here too. Do you think January 6th was the tip of the iceberg or a precursor to something much worse?
Well, look. Well, I think tip of the iceberg and something much worse is kind of the same thing, right?
I agree, yeah. And I would say yes.
The answer is yes. But also, I will say this to be a little less flip about this because it's an important question. The answer to the question of what is the meaning of January 6th in American history is yet to be given. That will be decided in the next few months. It could either be, hopefully, that's the best case scenario. It could be the moment, or it could become the moment when all the pro-democracy forces in this country finally realized what they are up against, and they started to organize and to unite and fight back and to defeat sort of this sort of anti-democratic threat. That's one version.
Right.
But it could also become, the moment when it was proven without a doubt that the institutions tasked with upholding American democracy were just not willing or not able to do that.
Right.
And it could be basically the spark that ultimately brought American democracy down. That's yet to be decided, right?
All right, Nathan's got a longish. What about the hundreds of people Trump has put into power, including judges and these Supreme Court justices? If convicted, meaning him, shouldn't that trash be ousted too? Can they be? The point that gets to my larger question of, you can throw Trump in jail. Does that really put a stake through the heart of Trumpism?
Oh, no, of course not. Look, I'm to be very clear, that's not absolutely what I'm saying. I'm saying the opposite. Holding Trump accountable is absolutely necessary, but it's not going to be enough at all, right? And it's in many ways a focus on Trump, the person.
I heard babies.
You might hear my kids. We have a few more minutes until it gets. Okay. In many ways, a focus on Trump, the individual figure. Right. There's too much focus on him and not enough on Trumpism, right? The broader anti-democratic radicalization. DeSantis is Trumpism without Trump, right?
Yeah, and with a brain.
Huh?
And with a brain.
And although I think he's not nearly as smart as he thinks he is, but there is Trumpism without Trump, and overall, it is very, very important to focus on the broader anti-democratic radicalization of the American right, and not just on Trump, because Trump is the symptom of that. He's the result of that. He's not a cause of it. Right. And quickly on the question of the courts, look, it is absolutely crucial to understand the Supreme Court is now the spearhead of the reactionary counter-mobilization against multiracial pluralistic democracy in this country. That is just where we are. And so everyone, the sort of in a vacuum, it's totally fine to just say, hey, we have to uphold trust in the institutions and whatever. Okay, fine. But what we need to grapple with is we're not in a vacuum, but in a situation where that specific institution has become not just part of the assault on democracy, but actually a spearhead of the reactionary anti-democratic assault. And we need to grapple with that. And again, no easy answers here, but definitely we need to grapple with that.
This is a good question, except it's a long one, so try not to give a long answer. Jingle Bells is asking, sorry if my question seems stupid, but this insanity mostly started with Trump, no?
No.
I knew you were going to say no.
No.
Can you give a short answer? Because
the short answer.
Of years going back.
No. The short answer is this. It is absolutely true that Trump has in many ways radicalized and exacerbated certain anti-democratic tendencies and impulses amongst conservatives and on the American right. That is absolutely. I'm not saying that we haven't seen, because we have seen a significant radicalization over the past, specifically, first since the Obama era, and then again specifically in reaction to the George Floyd protests in the summer of 2020, clearly. But Trump didn't start this, because he himself is already a result of long-standing anti-democratic tendencies and impulses on the American right. And I'll just say, just this one example, the founder, the godfather of modern conservatism, William F. Buckley, the man who founded the National Review, which is still, again, today sort of the leading, so the flagship medium for sort of respectable conservatism. This William F. Buckley, in 1957, wrote an editorial, or whatever you want to call it, in his own magazine, in the National Review, which was called "Why the South Must Prevail," and it was a reaction to the Supreme Court's decision to end racial segregation in the education sector and to basically end racial segregation.
The South or the Self?
Why the South must prevail.
The South?
Yes.
Oh.
So, and this is a reaction to, again, the Supreme Court saying, hey, this whole separate but equal thing where you're segregating the entirety of American life, that needs to stop. And Buckley is very clear. No, that cannot happen. We cannot let Black people in the South vote. Why not? Because, look, Black people are like half the population in the South. If we let them vote, that will lead to the end of, he calls it, Christian civilization or white Christian dominance. And he specifically says, look, my allegiance is not to democracy. My allegiance is to what I believe is the only political, social, and cultural order that is sort of legitimate in this country, which is, again, he calls it white Christianity or Christian civilization, white Christian dominance. And he clearly says, I can kind of live with democracy as long as it doesn't threaten this. But as soon as it does threaten this, I'm out. And again, this is the founder, the godfather of this. So again, these anti-democratic tendencies and impulses, they have been there all along, and Trump is a result of this, not the cause.
All right, let me pull up another TikTok question. Hang on a sec. I've got to go scroll through them. Sorry, a lot of people are asking about Ukraine. We're not doing Ukraine today. Actually, there's not too much on the TikTok thing. I'll look back. I've got a few more on these guys then. Eric, my Frenchman, how will America's democracy and spirit be saved in the years to come? Well, I guess that, again, it's sort of the prescription of what has to happen. I know Trump, this sort of comes back again. I guess I don't feel like I've gotten a clear answer out of you.
No, I mean,
what do we do?
I'm not claiming to have one.
No. But I mean, what do we do? I don't like, elections are nice, but so we win this election, they're only going to try to steal. They're just going to try to elect more and more people who are going to steal the election, the more election officials and everything else.
Right. So I think if we're looking for reasons to be maybe not optimistic, but like not completely
not slit our wrists.
Right? Yeah. The biggest reason is always remember the Republican or the conservative project of turning the clock back to this sort of pre-civil rights era, white Christian patriarchal dominance, 1950s style. It's a minoritarian project. They do not have majority support for this. Right. The clear majority of the American people is opposed to that. It's the project of a radicalizing but shrinking minority.
Right.
And so what we need to do, and look, if this country were a functioning democratic system where getting the majority of the votes would actually translate into holding political power, right? If this were the situation, we wouldn't be in this very terrible place we're in. We would still have a problem with sort of all this sort of fascistic violence. But again, the big problem in America is that due to all these sort of anti-democratic distortions in the political system, you don't need 50% of the vote to hold political power, and Republicans understand this very well. So again, the long-term project needs to be to democratize the system. The structures of American politics need to be democratized to the point where if you have majority support in the population, you actually hold political power, right? That needs to be the goal. How do we get there? Very, very hard question. But I think, look, again, I think it's very encouraging, or somewhat encouraging at least, that the president of the United States is now very clearly describing the situation, and he's no longer just talking about his friendship with Mitch McConnell. He is telling the American people, look, this is the threat, and we need to answer it. And I think what Biden said, his answer was, I think it was a really good one. He said, look, for the time being, defending democracy has to be the overriding concern for everyone. When you go vote, right? I know we all have our policy differences, but for the time being, democracy, we have to be single issue voters for democracy, basically. I think that's a good start. It's not it might not be enough, but it's definitely necessary.
Yeah. Now, I'll throw a quick one here that was interesting from Elise, kind of more, maybe there's something, but could you ask about time cycles for democracy? 1780-ish, 1860, 1940, 2020. Seems like we have to defend what's important every 80 years. Are there cycles?
No, there's no history does not happen in cycles. Again, because history is not repetitive. The world of the 2020s is not recycling the 1940s, because we live in a world that has already gone through the 1940s and has been shaped by the 1940s, right? History is accumulative, right? History accumulates. It doesn't repeat. My more concrete answer to this is, I think this presumes that in the intermediate, right, there was no crisis of democracy, or it was kind of stable or whatever, but that was never the situation, right? Like in between, let's say, like 1940 and 2020, I mean, look, in the 1950s and 60s, we have a massive white reactionary backlash to the civil rights legislation, which was absolutely a big crisis for America, right? There's no like, oh, things were fine in between. That's just not the situation, right? So again, no, there's no cycling, and there's no it's fine in between. It's a constant struggle, is what it is.
Maybe that's what it means. Yeah,
it really, that's what it is. And I think, again, this is maybe a slightly hopeful note, is that the biggest reason why the American right, why conservatives are radicalizing right at this moment, is because America, the country, has become more democratic in the recent past. It has become more pluralistic. It has become less religious, less white, more pluralistic. All that stuff that they hate, that they despise. Those are not figments of the reactionary imagination. That has actually happened due to demographic change and political change and cultural change. The reason why they're radicalizing is that they see themselves with their backs against the wall, and they believe that their vision of real America is sort of dying. And again, like, it is true that America, in many ways, this country has never been as close as it is today to realizing this vision of a truly egalitarian, all people are created equal, multiracial, pluralistic democracy. It's never been
Joe Biden and Barack Obama.
No. The difference is they are saying there is a higher force, a kind of a natural law that will lead us to the promised
land. Yeah.
I'm saying, no, that's not what's happening. Right. It could absolutely go wrong. These people could absolutely win. But the reason why they are radicalizing so much right now is because they can see that the country around them is changing away from their vision for the country. So there is something hopeful, I think, in that vision. Maybe. I don't know.
All right, I'm going to let Thomas go. My dog is growling at Mom's dog.
Yeah, and I think my kids are crying. So your
kids are crying, and my dog's growling. All right, this was wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks, everybody. We got to at least a lot of the questions, which is good. Tell folks where they can find you so they can scare you. No, but I mean, Twitter, I think, the most...
Twitter is the best way to follow me. I'm very active on Twitter. I'm certainly like...
What's your handle?
It's a tzimmer_history, and I'm also writing a regular column for The Guardian about all things American democracy. But I'm always yes. But I'm always tweeting everything I do, everything I write, every whatever interview. I tweet that out, and you'll get lots of like very long threads about long multi-tweet.
They're good, though. Your stuff is good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's probably the best way to hear what I have to say.
Yeah. Okay, good. Then tzimmer underscore.
Yes.
Underscore what? History?
Yes. Zimmer. So my name is Thomas.
That's your Twitter handle. Yeah. Okay.
That's my Twitter handle, tzimmer_history, or you just Google Thomas Zimmer Twitter. I think that's also going to work.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's probably the best way. And I'm trying to all my thoughts and sort of commentary on the state of American democracy. You'll find there. Yes.
That's good. Guardian stuff too. Well, thank you. This is great. We'll have to have lunch again. Finally, we keep putting it off. I'm back in a couple of weeks. So
yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
It's cold again.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. I'll see you guys tomorrow, same time. All right. Bye.
Bye.